Hi, Tucker. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, Terry? It's nice to see you again.
I'm great. I'm doing really well. It's been a
Good.
while since I've seen you, and
It has
I
been.
can't believe it's been almost a year.
I know. It's crazy. And my how things have changed in short 12 months, right?
It's amazing. It's amazing. But you are a person that I met while we were both speaking in Seattle last January. And I was really impressed with the message that you were giving to the audience and that you do in your work and business. And I had a connection with you immediately because I see that you're doing a lot to make a difference in the world. So I was so happy and proud to have you as a guest.
Thank you so much. That means a lot. And yes, we had a great connection. We were at Women in Cloud, and I think we both had a similar alignment of things that we wanted to share with the world. And I'm so glad we've stayed connected so we can continue that dialogue.
Me too, me too. And I can't wait to do more. But first of all, will you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Okay, let's see. I have a career about 25 years in the marketing branding world. Started off in the advertising way back when in the early 90s, and have ever since had a passion for marketing things. And about 10 years ago, my mentor in the industry started TEDx San Diego, and I fell in love with the concept of TEDx, the platform, the messages, and watching speakers for the first time get up on a stage and share their ideas with the world that actually had created impact. And after a long time of thinking about it, I realized that being in a career of advertising for so long, I wanted to change. And about 5 years ago, decided that I was going to take a giant leap of faith and focus on my passion, what I love to do most, and it's helping people use their personal stories to create purpose-driven businesses. And it's something that I love doing. So instead of branding things and services and products and all that kind of other stuff, I get to help brand people. And that to me brings the most satisfaction. I've been married for 20 years, live in San Diego, California. I've got an amazing daughter who's 12 and a son who's 15, and a wife who has been diligent in helping us navigate this new process of living a life of quarantine and pandemic. But I'm really excited to be part of creating movements. And that's my passion is.
Well, obviously, now I know why we connected. Yes, thank you for the reminder. I love what you do. I love what you're about. And so I'm going to start off, first of all, with the first question, and we're just going to get right into it.
Go for it.
And you know that we're doing this for the Choose Courage movement, and that I did a TEDx talk, and it was about courage in a book. So I'm going to ask you, do you see yourself as courageous in a new moment in time?
Yes, first of all, I love that word. And one of the things that it reminds me of is it's kind of how funny the word courageous and your definition of courageous changes over time. I
Yeah.
remember growing up as a kid that when you thought about someone who was courageous, it was the firefighter, it was the policeman, it was the soldier, it was people putting their lives out there on the line for you. That was courageous, right? So, in thinking about that, as someone who's kind of navigated their career in marketing and so forth, for the longest time, I never saw myself as being someone who even had an act of courage, because it was like, okay, well, I'm not putting my life out there. I'm not on the fighting lines, trying to save other people's lives. But it wasn't until probably 5 years ago when I realized that after being in a career for so many years, a couple decades, and especially being at the same company for so long, that I realized that the fire that you're fighting, the war that you're going into, or the fight that you're trying to save yourself and protect yourself from doesn't have to be those things, those literal things. The war that you're fighting, those things that you're going to battle for are actually things that happen in your life. They're metaphorically much bigger than what you think. So, about 5 years ago, and thinking about how all of this was going to come together, for the first time ever, I actually did see that I can be courageous in my own life, because looking out for myself, looking out for my family, looking out for my wife, my kids, and thinking about what is it like to be a provider on this planet, or the way in which I can create an impact on this planet, that in itself is courageous. And being in an industry for so long where courage wasn't really that much of a question. It was sales, it was things, it was growth, it was numbers. The quality of the work was less important than the quantity.
Mm.
So it wasn't until, gosh, 5 years ago when I remember sitting there to myself, I was at the lowest of my lows. And I thought, okay, I'm 40 years old and I've gone this far and I've never been this miserable. And I'm thinking to myself, there's no courage in that. How do you go to your family and say, I'm not doing well? How do you go to your boss and say, I don't like what I do? And at that moment, I realized there wasn't an ounce of courage left in me that could be a part of that. And I just remember thinking to myself, if this is what courage looks like, then clearly I don't understand the definition of it. And at that point, I remember that if I could take the trajectory of something that was literally rock bottom, and when I say rock bottom, I don't talk about it that often, but isolating, drinking too much, unhealthy behaviors, not finding purpose in anything, just a wreck of a person, just a shell of a
Yeah.
person.
Wow.
And it wasn't until that moment I realized that at the age of 40, and here I am 5 years later, that one of the most courageous steps that I could take is literally decide that the only thing I had to change was everything. And I literally
Ah,
had to
wow, that
change
took my breath away.
everything about my life, all the way down into like what was inside.
Tucker.
And to me,
Wow.
that was like, okay, if there's an ounce of courage left, to me, the biggest act of courage that I could do for my family, for my parents, is to raise that hand and say, I need help. I can't do this by myself. I need to surround myself with the right people. I need to find something that makes me happy. I need to create a purpose driven life because I haven't had that in so long.
Yes.
And when you think about that little boy who's like, oh yeah, the firefighter and the soldier and this and that, it's like, okay, maybe this is the war that God had me fight. And this is when I have to step up to be my own firefighter, my own policeman, my own
You too.
soldier, whatever it is. And to me, that was that moment in time where it's like I had to just throw away everything that I knew and focus on everything that I didn't know and learn it all over again. And learning how to speak a new language, learning how to put myself out there in a whole different way. But for the first time ever, Terry, this was the weird thing. I went from like the lowest of my life to like the highest of my life in a short period of time. And that whole concept of courage being the comeback
Yes.
of like, okay, it's okay even at the age of 40 to say, this ain't gonna work, and you gotta change something about everything. So for me, simply sometimes raising your hand and
Yes.
saying, I know I have a bigger purpose on this planet, but for the last 20 years, I haven't been living it. I've been trying to fulfill somebody else's expectations, follow the path of, oh, you do this and you climb the corporate ladder and do this and that. And I'm like, nothing felt authentic to me. So that to me was like, that was the moment. And that was at the age of 40. I'm like, okay, yeah, I can consider myself courageous to a certain degree.
That just blew my mind because what you're saying, I'm sure a lot of people right now are relating to, and especially this last year, when
Yes.
everything falls apart outside of you,
Yeah.
you are grabbing for what's real. What is the meaning of life? And I know that I've had moments of that even this last year, but when you had that kind of dramatic halt or change, or knowing that something, I'm either going to go one direction or I'm going to go the other, and I have a choice right now, and you didn't have a name for what that was probably at that moment.
No.
And I think that is really what I went out to find out when I was writing my book, is I wanted to understand why people buckled and never recovered under challenges or difficulties, or whatever they're going through. Others make it and they thrive. They're not only surviving, they're thriving. And that sounds like your story, which to me, especially as a man, and that's why I wanted to interview more men, because there's a lot more pressure on you as when you have a family
Mhm.
to make sure everything's going, I'm supposed to be the strong one. I think, they I think things are changing, but I think that's just kind of in your subconscious, even, that I have to be strong. And so I want to know, what was the defining moment? And I have two more questions for you, but this
Yeah.
is such an amazing story. And I want to thank you for being so vulnerable and honest with us, because what you just said is going to help other people be honest and maybe have the courage to make a drastic, radical change for a purpose driven life, like you said, because that's only the place that happiness will reside.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
Absolutely.
was there a defining moment? And we can go on to the next two questions, but what helped you make that? It sounds like a drastic decision, and that it almost feels like a moment that you had to make a decision.
It was, and I think for me, it was a I mean, it was a dark moment, and for me, it was, you have an opportunity to get on living or get on dying, and it was that, it's one of Shawshank Redemption, that was, like, one of my favorite lines. It's like, and
Yes.
I'm realizing sitting there in this spot, like, okay, you've got a wife and and kids. You've got somebody that's depending on you. You have everything that you need is right in front of you, but you're not doing anything with it. And I think at that moment, I realized that I had a choice to make to literally either get on living or get on dying. I chose life, but it wasn't just going to be, and that was probably the harder road at that point. But I
Right.
realized at that point that the harder road and the road less traveled was going to be for me the better situation. And I had multiple conversations with a couple of people, and the moment that I start talking about it a little bit more, people say, "Hey, your story could be a roadmap for other people. Do you think about that? We talk about somebody else's trash or someone else's treasure. Well, somebody else's tragedy can be somebody else's moment of hope."
Yes.
And something that my wife and I have talked a lot about in terms of where do we see ourselves moving forward, and that moment of being in service to somebody else. And in order to keep all the great things that you have to give something away. And
Yeah.
that moment of kind of being in servant leadership and that moment of focusing on helping others, it is amazing. And I think at that point, when you think at the age of 40, and I'm 45 now, you think at the age of 40, well, how can you possibly start over? You can't start over at 40. Like you've this is all you've known. You went to school for this. You've got 20 years of experience in this and all that. It's kind of like, is it possible to start over? And the answer is yes. So that to me was that kind of defining moment.
It's a huge defining moment. And your story is a beautiful story. And like you, both of us have talked about, and in your presentations, that sharing our story will really
Yeah.
help set free other people that are having the same struggle, that are the same story in some part of their life. And I'm just honored and grateful for you to be so honest to share this story. And
Thank
so
you.
the second question, I think you might have already answered, but have you? When did you choose courage over fear or doubt? Was that moment?
It was at that moment. And I think one of the things that having kids now that are teenagers and watching them kind of grow into themselves. One of the things that I noticed, in education, right? We're not taught emotional intelligences. It's something that ends up becoming learned. And if it's not learned in a healthy way, oftentimes it can take us in the wrong direction. And for me, I was also always taught that, in college, you go to college, you find the major of your choice, and you get all these blah 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 blah, and you graduate with that degree, and you've already set the trajectory of your life with that. It's already predetermined, and this is the path you're going to follow.
Yes.
And I think for me, it's that moment specifically where you have to say, if it's no longer fulfilling, if it's not driving any sort of passion, if it's literally yanking the soul out of you, something's got to change.
Yes.
And for me, it was at the age of 40 and waking up and saying, I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to focus on myself. I'm going to focus on my health. I'm going to focus on my family. I'm going to focus on rebuilding the relationships around me that all suffered because I was suffering and not in a happy place. So for me, it was making the decision to literally throw everything that I knew away, and this is as a vulnerable father and
That's
husband,
incredibly courageous.
and
Incredibly.
just saying, I have to start over.
Yeah.
And I would say in those 5 years, I've never been happier in my career. I've never met more incredible people. And the moment, like, when you and I started talking originally about, storytelling and that sort of thing, I realized that the moment you tell your own story, it immediately gives permission to somebody else to tell theirs.
It
And it's one of those things that I never thought possible is something that you could actually make a career out of. And I remember, and I changed it right at the last minute because you and I were talking before we got on stage, that my call to action was, you know, imagine yourself being in the most vulnerable spot in your life and realizing the best way to actually create a new world for yourself is to share something that most people don't normally share.
Yes.
And those are the taboo things. We keep them all like personal stories are meant to be personal, and that's it. So I've been kind of preaching and sharing and coaching my clients around allowing your personal story, that moment of courage that you
Mhm.
want to make a change, and allow that to be the basis for your purpose driven business. And
Yes.
I see a lot of people, the moment I start sharing a little bit more, they're like, that's me, or that's my spouse, or I can relate to that, or whatever it is. And it's like, gosh, finally someone's saying it's okay. It's almost like you become that permissive voice to
Yes.
say, it's okay to do this. It's okay to feel this way. It's okay to start over. It's okay, as long as you're doing it to follow something that's going to make you happy.
Mhm.
Because everyone around me will attest that an unhappy me is an unhappy everybody else. So that in itself, feeling the pressure as a father and as a husband and as a male to be that provider, that if I can't provide for myself, how can I possibly provide for everybody else around me? And that probably, when we talk about courage, that's a fire, that's a battle, that's a fight, whatever it is.
Yes.
Going back to that kind of childhood description of what courage is, it's like, okay, I can pull out the fire hose and put this one out, but it's going to take a lot of guts and glory.
It is. And it's not always pretty, but you can
No.
do it, and you can start over at any moment and any time, and follow a purpose-driven, passionate life. And how lucky are your children and your wife? And I do consider my children also lucky, because I believe in that, and
Mhm.
that I do tell them that, and they've told me that. And I think more people need to understand that we can give them permission to do that. It hasn't been okay. It's almost hasn't been okay to really live a fulfilling life, and what you're really meant to do. And that
Mhm.
takes probably the most courage I've ever I've ever experienced in my own life, and I've seen in other people's life, is to really show up fully who you are and what you're meant to be
Yeah.
and do, regardless if you're a male, female,
Mhm.
father, and so it's like you will be there for them when you start doing that. You have more to give, and
Yeah.
that's what you've just told us. So I know we need to have a follow-up on this, because I think more people need to know this message. I'd love to have more time with you. So let's finish up with our
Okay.
last question, which I think it's just organic, where you've already probably answered some of these things. But in a new moment in time, as if you never heard this question before, what would you do right now or into the future
Mhm.
if you decided to choose courage over fear or doubt?
Yeah. Well, it's very apropos for me too, in a couple different ways. One is, having teenage kids at this point, realizing that, we have generations of different parenting styles and so forth. And one of the things we think about is, okay, we're going to create this new life for our kids. It's going to be different than ours, and that sort of thing. And one of the things that I grew up with was no failure. Right? There's no failure,
Hmm.
or it was hidden, whatever it was.
Yes.
In that first moment that I say to embrace failure is such a huge thing. And realizing now that strive for perfection is nothing but creating happiness for somebody else and not yourself. So that concept of embracing failure and teaching our kids that it's okay to fail. And if at anything, my biggest failure in life became the biggest thing for me in terms of providing success.
It's a defining
I
moment.
didn't understand that from before. And I
Yeah.
think the other thing for me in terms of an act of courage, or something on the new moment in time for me, is being a voice for men around this middle age kind of thing, because I hear it more and more.
Yes.
The struggle, we're struggling, this and that. And there's a lot of resources out there that I think a lot of people don't take advantage of. And sometimes it takes a permissive voice, a vulnerable voice, or somebody that they can relate to just say, hey, you know what? It's okay. You can feel this way. Or, hey, it's okay to raise your hand. So part of this journey for me, it's about kind of reigniting that family unit
Mm.
around embracing what is to be scary, or unfamiliar or fearful or even failure, to allow the family unit to come together. And the second really is to be that voice for men at that age where it's like, it's okay to reinvent. It's okay to
Yes.
start over. It's okay to admit failure. It's okay to say I'm struggling. And it's okay to raise my hand and say, I need help. And I say this, and a couple of guys have said, well, asking for help, it just means like you've admitted failure. And I said, well, why don't you change the language. And you know that I love words and
Yes.
messaging. I say, well, instead of looking at it from that perspective, what if asking for help means that your mission is so big that you can't do it on your own and you need to invite other people into it for that success to be that much greater? It's like,
Beautiful.
oh, okay, reframe what
Yeah.
you perceive to be a negative or a downfall or something that's uncharacteristic, and allow it to be an open invitation to say, hey, you know what? The reason I need help isn't because I'm failing or I'm struggling, as much as it is this idea is so big and it means so much to me that I want other people to be a part of it. So I think being that permissive voice and helping other men at that age that are really struggling. And I tell you, Terry, the moment you just start a dialogue or a story, they kind of look at you like, is
Is
he
this
really
okay?
going? He's going there. He's going. And it's like, thank God. And it's like, and then they look at me and say, how did you do it? And
Yeah.
that's the moments where it's like they've admitted defeat or they admitted that there's something else there that needs support. And then that's a whole different kind of journey. And then
Tucker,
that opens up the doors to, okay, if I want to choose courage, I want to choose fulfillment or passion or purpose, then all of a sudden at the age of whatever it is, they can reinvent themselves. And
Tucker,
that to me,
amazing.
that's where the legacy starts.
You do
Um,
have a legacy right now that you've already are giving to so many people. And I know your message is needed right now more than ever. So thank you so much for giving the permission to all of us to raise our hand,
mhm.
men, women, everyone, and say that we need help, that it's okay to start over. And that courage is there when we need it. We really
Yeah,
can find it. And you can be rock bottom and find it and start over again. And your
yeah.
message has been so important right now. So thank you. And how can people get a hold of you, especially if, there's men out there that want to connect to another man that's gone through this?
Absolutely. The easiest way is through my website, which is Tucker Stine. So it's stine.com.
Okay,
I'm
great.
also on LinkedIn. You can just search for my name, Tucker Stine, Stine. You can find me there. I'm really great with messaging. I would love to connect. Even if you have no idea what it might be about, just to start a conversation. Some of the greatest partnerships and collaborations that I've seen in the last, couple of years have started just with hey, I resonated with your story and I just wanted to talk. And all of a sudden you realize that just having that dialogue, it doesn't come down to skill sets and awards and certifications and degrees and titles and roles and all that kind of other stuff.
Yes.
The best role is to be human. And if you can just have that interaction, that's where I start a lot of my conversations. So
Oh, Tucker. Tucker, you're such a beacon of light. I mean, you really have touched me today. I almost feel speechless because of all the beauty and the wisdom that you have learned through all of that you've been through. And you're now sharing with us and you're giving back.
yeah,
Thank you
feels
for that.
good.
Thank you so much. And I
Absolutely.
look forward to continuing this conversation. And I
Me
really
too.
hope
Thanks for having me.
you're so welcome. I hope everything is going incredibly well. And we're looking forward to, yeah, a new year coming up and new and wonderful things to happen.
You too.
But take care.
Thanks,
I hope
Terry.
everything's well with you and your family.
You too. Take
Okay.
care.
All right. Bye bye.
Bye bye.